Welcome to our monthly Girlfriend Book Club discussion. I'm Shelley Emling, the editor of The Girlfriend. I'm also the moderator of the Girlfriend Book Club. And before we get started, I just have to say thank you to everybody that's a member of the Girlfriend Book Club. We surpassed 30,000 members this month. And so I'm just so appreciative of everybody for being a member of the Girlfriend Book Club and contributing and doing all that you do to make it a success. It has been one of my great joys. So thank you so much. This month in July, you all chose, not me, you all chose The Good Sister as our July book club pick. And so I'm so thrilled to welcome Sally Hepworth, the author of The Good Sister. But before I do that, this is her 6th novel, and I want to make sure I acknowledge her other books. She's also the author of the amazing The Mother-in-Law, The Family Next Door, The Mother's Promise, The Things We Keep, and The Secrets of Midwives. So she's a very busy and a very successful author, and this is her 6th book, The Good Sister. So welcome, Sally.
Hello, thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here.
We are so thrilled to have you here. So first of all, I think everybody would just like to know a little bit about you, your history, where you're from, where you live. How did you get into writing? That sort of thing. Just a few little personal tidbits to start off with.
That's a great place to start. I think the first thing that you'll notice about me is that I'm Australian.
You are.
I often have started this with people not knowing that, and they've said, we can't really understand what she's saying. She talks funny. So that is the first truth about me, that I was born and raised in Australia, apart from a small period where I was quite a young child, where I lived in Singapore for 3 years.
Very nice.
That was a really fun time. And then I finished school and immediately jumped on a plane, moved to London for 3 years, traveled the world, came back, met my now husband. We moved to Canada and we lived there for 3 years. So I was really a bit of a world traveler before I settled down and decided to return home to Australia. It was when I was having my first baby and taking maternity leave that I decided to try writing a novel. It was something that I'd always wanted to do and was always a voracious reader. But I think, like many people who say, I've got a book in me, I feel like I need to write a book, I didn't know how to do it. It wasn't like, if you want to become a dentist or a doctor or that there's a vocational route, really. It kind of felt like writing a book was something that old men did, in a cabin by a lake while drunk, isn't it? And not something that, a 30-year-old woman could really do. But so I did what I recommend everyone do, which is I opened up my Google browser and I typed in how to write a novel. And Google, as always, was very helpful. And it gave me many methods that I could employ to try and write a novel. And at that time, I was living in Canada and I had just had a baby, and the Canadians, being the wonderful people that they were paying me for a year of maternity leave. And so I decided that I would listen to Google and I would use all the nap times and the sleep times to try and write a book. And so that was the beginning of it. I wrote a very, very terrible book that year when I was, between breastfeeding and looking after my baby. But I'd got the what's the word? I'd got the bug. I'd been bitten, and I knew that was what I wanted to do. So,
which one of your books which one was your first book? I actually don't know that answer.
That's a good story. So that first book was, I called it Love Like the French, and it was really my first attempt to write. But what was interesting about it was that, and it was the worst book in the world. Like, I really can't stress that enough. But it did actually get me a literary agent, which was just a marvelous thing. But my literary agent, who was in New York, tried to pitch it to New York publishers and quite rightly did not get any takers. And then he sent it to the London Book Fair, because this book was set in London and in the south of France. And he thought maybe we might get a British publisher or perhaps even a French publisher. for some reason I will never understand, it was many offers were made from German publishers, and so that book, which has now been translated and it is no longer called Love Like the French, has been published, but only in the German language. So the only two words I understand on that book are Sally and Hepworth.
That's funny.
That was my entry into publishing.
So I just have to ask about The Good Sister. I posted something in the Girlfriend Book Club asking, what do people want to know from you? And one of the main questions is there going to be a sequel to The Good Sister? Because it seemed like it ended on a cliffhanger that, you could carry forward into another book. So
I know.
And I think people would love to see a sequel. So I will just add that.
Would they? I have had that question a lot, and the answer is I didn't plan it with a sequel in mind. In fact, that last scene came to me as I wrote it. I'm really guilty of wanting to shock people. I often find myself, closing up a scene or a chapter, or certainly the end of the book, where I just feel this compulsion to just write something that will just turn the whole book on its head. And I did that this time, and as I did it, I thought, gee, this could be another book. And I have never been interested in writing sequels. I think that they're difficult to do, particularly if you didn't set out to do it, because you've already got these. But it's the first book of all of the books I've written where I would be open to it. If my publisher wanted one, I would be open to it.
Everybody's happy to hear that. Somebody else, a couple of people asked me that they thought, and this is a spoiler alert, so hopefully everybody that's watching this has read the book, but they thought that Rose would kill Wally, or that she might have killed Wally. Oh. Did that ever cross your mind? And I got that from quite a few people, that they thought that's where the book was going to go. Did that ever occur to you?
No. Oh my goodness, I've never heard that before. But no, I could never kill Wally. It's funny,
he was so lovely, but some people thought Rose might have had it in her to do that.
I think she might have had it in her. She would have had it in her. I'm not sure that she had fully realized the benefit of that, but wow, I mean, maybe if there's a sequel, that could be one of the threats. But no, I'm so interested that that's what people thought.
No, people were talking about that. Yeah, they really were. So, also, so Fern is neurodiverse, I believe, and she does not like a lot of stimulation in the book, and that's a big part of who she is. So, a lot of people asked, was there an inspiration for that? How did you come up with that? Did you research that a lot? Did you know somebody like that? Where did that come from?
Yes, I have a neurodiverse family. So in my immediate family, there is autism, ADHD, sensory processing disorder. And so it is, I'm not neurodiverse, but it's in my family. And it's something that for a long time I have thought, should I have a neurodiverse character? Is it my place to write a neurodiverse character? If I did write a neurodiverse character, what would I be bringing that hasn't been brought before? And I really thought about it for a long time. And what I really decided that I wanted to see in fiction, in terms of books that I would read, and then I didn't see it, so I wanted to write it, was I wanted to see sensory processing disorder really highlighted, because it's such a common comorbidity of autism. I think that books are getting so much better at covering autism and showing more colors of the spectrum, as opposed to just a very rigid, very sort of emotionless character. We're starting to see that there are so many different kinds of people who are on the spectrum, but I hadn't seen sensory processing disorder highlighted, and I think it's something that, at least in our family, is one of the most challenging parts of autism, and something that as a family we would love people to have more of an understanding for, and empathy and sympathy and all of the things. So that highlighting that was one thing that I really wanted to achieve. The other thing, as a mother, that is really important to me to see in fiction and for my children to see, is that neurodiverse characters exist in books not because they're neurodiverse, you know, they're not there trying to figure out their neurodiversity or have their family figure it out. They're just there living their life because neurodiverse people exist in the world. Do you know what I mean? That she wasn't there to serve some moral purpose. In fact, her neurodiversity was the least interesting thing about Fern. You know, she was this amazing librarian. She was a, you know, someone that Wally fell in love with. She was beloved by her library community. Yes, and so why shouldn't she be the heroine of a book in her own right? And I'd love to see more of that in fiction, because it's what we see in the world.
Yeah, I mean, I love the scene. I think there was a scene where Wally took her to a restaurant and she sort of crumbled. And you know, it was really interesting because I did not really know that much about that topic. So it was really, it educated a lot of people, I think. So that was really well done. Really interesting.
I'm so glad.
I read an interview with you that you did in which you said you believe everybody has a little bit of good in them and a little bit of evil in them, and that we're all products of our upbringing and experiences. And so, is that a theme that you really like to hone in on all your books? And I haven't read all of your books, and I apologize, but is that a theme? You know, that we're all a little bit good, a little bit not so good, and you know, our upbringing does play a huge part into who we become. Is that something you really try to drive home in each of your books?
Yes, absolutely. I've always been far more interested in characters that have shades of grey to them. You know, to me, the cartoonish villain who's just evil for the sake of being evil and out to get people. I mean, while there are sociopaths in the world, you know, who loosely feel that, they're not interesting to me. You know, what is interesting to me is a character who is kind of good but also flawed, you know, that has the right intentions but does bad things, because that's what I do as a human being. You know, I think I'm good, but sometimes I've done some, you know, mean things or awful things or, you know, selfish things. And so to add those colors to a character, I find makes them so much easier to connect with and to kind of step into their shoes and follow their story. So that's why, you know, I like that good and bad thing. There was something else you said.
Well, I read that you said that you don't see the world in black and white anymore. It's many shades of gray, which I think as the older you get, we all sort of kind of feel that way. You know?
I was going to say that it's an age thing, showing my age, but the older you get, the more shades of grey you see, isn't it?
Right. And I love that about the books, that that seems to be a theme that you carry through in your books. So.
Yes. And that was the second part of what I was going to say in terms of perspectives, is something that's also very interesting to me to explore. You know, in The Mother-in-Law, for example, isn't it interesting to take that stereotypical mother-in-law? So many people, so many women that I know, you know, say their mother-in-law is awful, but is it really reasonable to think that every mother-in-law is awful? What if we flipped this and looked at it from the mother-in-law's point of view? And that is something that I really enjoy playing with in fiction as well.
So The Good Sister has so many twists and turns, and you're like on the edge of your seat, and you know, at the end of so many chapters. And I just wondered, I mean, that is a real skill for a writer to be able to do that, to have a reader sitting there and they can't go to bed at night because they can't wait to see what happens next, because they really don't know what's going to happen next. So how do you hone that skill or talent? I mean, is that something you just had from the beginning, or did you love to read mysteries or thrillers and then you carried that over into your writing? I mean, that is a real talent.
Thank you. That is so lovely. And it's certainly what I like to read. I'm very easily bored. And I maybe that's, you know, in these days of technology and instant gratification, but if something's not happening in every chapter or in every episode in terms of my life, I don't like that. So of course, when I create my work, it is, you know, there are things happening. There's an eerie feeling. Again, like it's a little bit like the age thing. When I have to ask questions about the how, you know, how do you do this? How do you create characters that are like this? Or, you know, to keep the pages turning, I don't know. I'd love to. I feel like when I'd written my first book, I could have sat here and said, this is how you do it. These are the rules. This is what you do. But with each book that goes on, I realized that There is no rules. Everyone does it differently. Every writer does it differently. Often you end up in the same place using completely different processes. For me, it really is just about getting down in those characters, understanding who they are, and from that, the characters give me attention as opposed to the plot kind of follows what the character does. So
it seems like you're probably getting better and better each book, right? At doing that.
Well, that's the hope, isn't it? But who knows? Maybe it gets to a point and then let's hope not.
So what is your writing process like? I'm always curious when writers, join us for these monthly interviews. Do you say that I'm going to write from 9 to 3 every day, or take off on weekends? Or I know you have 3 kids. I mean, what is your writing process like?
Well, I'm a full-time writer, so I generally work 5 days a week, and from about 8 till 5 or so. My husband is the full-time primary parent, so he looks after the kids, he manages that, and I'm the full-time worker. So yes, it does tend to follow business hours to an extent, but then of course there are things that happen after work and on weekends, like with any job.
Right.
But in terms of my process, it's so funny how every single book is different, and not just different in that the material of the book is different, but I've had books that I have opened the computer and just typed and haven't really planned it. And I have had other ones, like the one I'm doing now, I'm planning it scene by scene before I start writing. And I think that it's funny because I do have a neurodiverse family. I think that I've probably got a bit of ADHD going on there, because once I have done something one way, I just want to do it another way. Yeah. And I feel like every book that I start is just so different that I couldn't possibly do it the same way as I have done another one. And that's really frustrating, because I feel like by now I should have a process that I can very cleanly tell you, and this is how I do it. Right. But what I can tell you is that I always end up in the same place, which is, with a book that kind of hangs together, and then with just a refining process that takes 4, 5, 6 drafts of just, the book's there. Once I get to that point where it's all down on the page, then it's just reviewing it and reviewing it and reviewing it, and getting those characters tighter and cleaning up the plot lines and things. That's always the same.
So which of your books was the easiest and fastest to write?
I think it was The Good Sister.
Was it?
Yes, it was. There was a book between The Mother-in-Law and The Good Sister that actually has never made it to print. It just was. The biggest disaster of my career was this dreadful book that never made it to print. Thank goodness. But after that, I found myself thinking, oh gosh, how do I write a book that is not going to do that again?
Right.
And how do I write it quickly? Because I've just wasted a year writing this book that is not going to be anything. And it was such a difficult time. And I was really creatively kind of thinking, wow, like this is really hard. And also financially, I am the only breadwinner in the household. So there was all this pressure. And then I decided on the book and what I was going to write. And I just decided I'm just going to put the fear aside, and I'm just going to write the book I want to tell. The story I want to tell. And it was so close to me because, as I said, of my family, I was really drawing for the character of Fern and Wally on my own family. And I really just kind of put that aside, and I wrote the book really quickly. And there's always little knotty parts of any book and parts that give you difficulty, but I didn't really lose much hair in this book compared to other books. And I'm always getting a bit grayer, but it wasn't in the grand scheme, it wasn't a bad one.
But you said when we talked before this interview about your own daughters, I believe. I mean, the inspiration for writing a book like this about the good sister, where you have 2 sisters and maybe they go back and forth. One's good at some point, one's not so good at another point. Can you talk a little bit about the inspiration for this book?
Yes, I mean, the first thing I'll say before that is that and this is a kind of admission I've been making all over the place since writing this book, is that I don't have a sister. I always feel really sheepish about saying that because I've written a book about sisters. But here's my explanation. I've been surrounded by sisters my whole life. My mum is one of 5 sisters, and I can guarantee that there has been some inspiration there. All of my good friends have got at least one sister. So I've really spent my life observing this relationship from the outside and wishing I was part of it. And so then, of course, most recently, I've become the mum to 2 daughters. And I have had, as per the dedication of the book, which I don't have in front of me, it's dedicated to my daughters for showing me the great wonders and the greater horrors
of being a sister.
Being a sister. So the moment happened, it was a couple of years ago. I was watching my little girls play in the garden. They were 2 and 6, and it was all looking really good, and then it was all looking really bad. So we went from the squeals of joy to those squeals of horror and pain, and someone's hurt. So I charged out there to see what had happened, and I found my older daughter, who was 6, with this ring of teeth marks in her arm, and my younger 2-year-old daughter was standing there kind of looking kind of guilty. So it was pretty clear to see what had happened. And the first funny thing was that I said to Clementine, my 2-year-old, "Why did you bite your sister?" And she said, "Because she annoys me sometimes." I thought, sometimes, not that particular minute, but okay, sometimes. And then so I went to reprimand her in a very kindly kind of way that one would reprimand a 2-year-old. But my 6-year-old, the injured party, at that point steps between me and her sister and says to me, "Don't you yell at my baby sister." And I was so confused because right after she had been bitten, and I was so confused. And then she said to me, "Don't worry, Mummy, I'll get her back later when she least expects it." And I thought, well, if that isn't all the colours of sisterhood, the biting, then stepping in to save her, and then saying you're going to get her later, it was the whole thing. And I walked away from that, and I came into my office, and I wrote on my little notebook, "Sisters?" ? And that was the beginning of it.
So a lot of people are writing in the comments that they love the mother-in-law book, but a lot of people are saying if they've just read The Good Sister, would you be able to recommend which book of yours to read next as a follow-up if they haven't read anything else by you?
I would definitely say The Mother-in-Law. I think that The Good Sister and The Mother-in-Law are my favourites of the books, but that maybe makes sense because they're the most recent ones.
Yeah.
The other one, I mean, I think there's something to be found in all of them, but the other one that I get the most kind of love for is The Secrets of Midwives, which was my first book, not the German book. The first book published in English was The Secrets of Midwives, and I think there's something quite people love books about birth and babies and midwifery, I think, so that's got a special place in people's hearts. But The Mother-in-Law and The Good Sister are probably my top picks.
Yeah, and a few people have asked, do you have a sister? But no, you don't.
I have 2 big brothers who made my life hell, and I loved it when Mum got them in trouble. In fact, I still love it when Mum tells off those boys who are in their 40s now. It's happy days.
So The Mother-in-Law, I think that's been optioned as a TV series by Amy Poehler. Yeah. Can you talk about that? Is that still happening?
Yeah, so that was something that happened 2019 before the world fell apart, which was really exciting. So we did have plans for a pilot in 2020, but of course nothing happened in 2020. So it's still ticking along. I got an email about it about a month ago with a little bit of news. So it's been it looks like it's all going ahead. Fingers crossed. There's little developments that come, and we're still really hopeful, and I hope to see it on the small screen.
And Amy Poehler is great, so that's phenomenal.
Oh, I love her. Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of people are asking, I was going to ask you this anyway. I mean, are there 2 or 3 books or 2 or 3 authors that have inspired you that you could, tell people about that a couple books they should read or authors they should, explore. Yeah. What do you say about that?
I mean, I think that everyone will have read all the ones that I'm going to tell you, but Liane Moriarty is one of my favorite authors, and I've read every one of her books, and is a huge inspiration to me. There is a American author called Mary Kubica that writes kind of classic thrillers. The Other Misses is a wonderful one. She wrote one called Pretty Baby, The Good Girl. Anything that she writes is just fantastic. Any book by Kelly Rimmer, so she is another Australian author. Her most recent book was just a New York Times bestseller. It's called The Warsaw Orphan. But her book before that, which was called The Things We Cannot Say, is probably my favorite book of all time.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. It's just, she is just a beautiful author, and is just growing and becoming more popular.
I think you like Sue Monk Kidd, is that right?
Oh, I love Sue Monk Kidd. The Secret Life of Bees, of course, was just so beautiful. But and she's had a couple since then, but The Invention of Wings, which was the book about the real life abolitionists, the Grimke sisters, and it was then told. There was a true story about how Sarah Grimke tried to release a slave that she was given when she was 12 years old. And that was just a story, but Sue Monk Kidd recreated that by telling the story of Sarah Grimke alongside a fictional slave called Hetty, and sort of created a friendship between them. And it is just with real life events, and it's just the most stunning story. I think that would definitely be in my top 3.
Well, one of our books last year was The Book of Longings by Sue Monk Kidd. She actually joined us for an interview just like this. And it was a great book, and she was charming. I mean, it was great.
Yeah.
So somebody's asking, your last few book covers features people in windows. Is it symbolic or just artwork?
Do you know what's funny is that the most recent cover for The Younger Wife, which is my new book that's going to be out next year.
Ask you, The Younger Wife?
Yeah, The Younger Wife. Yeah, so the cover had actually, I've released it on my Instagram. It's available. I don't have a copy of it here, but originally that had a window on it. And I looked at it and I said, I think we've done with the windows. Like, I think there's a lot of windows. And so we changed it, but maybe that was a mistake. Maybe people recognize windows with Sally Hepworth.
They might.
But the artwork. Yeah, I certainly am not behind creating it. My entire role when it comes to artwork is looking at it and saying, "Oh, I like it," or maybe too many windows. But I've been so thrilled, and I'm very happy to leave the window creation to the experts, because I've got such great cover designers, and I think that they do a great job.
So I have to just say finally, I'm going to ask you 2 more questions. So what advice would you give somebody that's wanting to write a book, their first book? I mean, you Googled how to write it.
Google it.
So maybe you should just Google it, everybody. I don't know.
Again, like
get an agent, maybe perhaps get a good agent. I would assume, right?
I mean, I think getting an agent comes after you've written the book, and that's certainly a process in itself. But I think the writing of the book, find the way that you connect to something. For me, I really needed rules to follow that made me feel like, yes, this is working. I'm not just writing a whole lot of words that are never going to turn into something. Right. And so for me, it was about getting information, Googling, reading books about how to write novels. Right. For other people, it's really just about releasing themselves to just start writing. And as we've said already, I think that it's less about there being one way of doing it and more about connecting with you and how you're likely to be able to actually go through with it, because writing the book is the biggest challenge. And so I guess my only advice that's universal would be immerse yourself in the world. Listen to authors speak, as many as you can, because they'll all have different ways of doing it. Watch these kind of sessions with authors. Follow blogs, read a lot, and then you'll start to figure out your way of doing it.
And I loved how much of The Good Sister was about being in a library. I thought that was really great. I mean, I don't know if that's something you did on purpose but I think a lot of people really love that, because a lot of our book club members, obviously, they love going to the library. So that was a big deal, you know.
Yes, well, I wrote that book in my local library because before COVID, I used to take my computer every day and sit in the local library and write my book. That was my routine, which sadly has been disrupted by the fact that the libraries are closed. But so the book was written in the library where it was set, my local Bayside library, and the little room that Fern went into and the bathrooms and all of the things are actually in my library. And the librarians at the library helped me with whenever I would be sitting there and one of them would walk past and I would say, what's something that you do as a librarian that would surprise people? And they'd tell me a story and I'd write it down.
Great.
Or I'd say, what's the worst thing about being a librarian? And they would say, the printers and the photocopiers.
And she didn't like the photocopier.
Yeah, no.
That was great. No, that was great. Yeah. So my final question, because we're out of time, is that I just want to ask you, because The Girlfriend is all about female friendship and the power of female friendships. And so I just wondered, like, what do you want to, when you're not writing and reading, what do you like to do with your girlfriends in your fun time, in your spare time?
Oh gosh, I miss hanging out with my girlfriends. We actually had a beautiful, before we locked down again, because we're in lockdown in Australia, we all went out for a beautiful lunch to celebrate my friend's birthday. And that kind of thing where it's just the girls. I mean, we love the husbands or partners too, but sometimes when it's just us and, you know, a bit of wine and a bit of food, or even going to the movies or just hanging out at each other's houses, there's nothing like your female friends. And I think someone said to me recently, it's your girlfriends that you do life with, you know, the partners come and go, the children come and go, but you do your life with your girlfriends. And I think that's true.
Well, I hope Australia opens up again soon for your sake. So I just want to say thank you so much, Sally, for joining us. And everybody, I think everybody's probably read it that's watching this, but if you haven't, you know, share it with your friends. The Good Sister. It is a page turner that I finished last weekend. It's one of my favorite books of the year for sure. And everybody that's a member of the Girlfriend Book Club, please stay on the Girlfriend Book Club page. And I'm going to be posting some conversation starters so that you guys can talk about the book yourselves and comment about it. And so thank you so much, Sally. Good luck. We can't wait for your next book to come out. And just thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it.